The European Union could soon be forcing companies like Apple and Samsung to redesign their products in which they'll be more serviceable when it comes to the battery. With this piece of legislation, companies like Apple and Samsung will now need to redesign all their cell phones in order to comply with this piece of legislation. And given that Europe makes up around 25% of Apple's income and 18% of Samsung's income, these companies will need to begin the process of redesigning their batteries to meet these regulations. So this is going to be a huge step for right to repair and people who just like to work on their own electronics. Modern iPhones are becoming more and more increasingly complex, and the battery is just one component that is really headache inducing when it comes to replacing it. It's both a lengthy process and a really difficult process. The first video ever posted on my channel is a battery guide, and that video itself was around 28 minutes long. So if you've never really replaced a battery before, or if you've never really worked on any sort of electronics, this repair is probably going to take you a whole entire afternoon. For that reason, a lot of people don't really perform this repair, and they opt to bring it to a repair shop or bring it to the Apple store or where they originally bought the phone. And even if you do elect to decide to go through the repair yourself, you're going to be locked out of some features. Apple is notorious for locking out some of their features when it comes to replacing their components. For instance, if you replace the battery, you're going to lose out on battery health, and the iPhone's going to throw you a non-genuine parts message. For that reason, a lot of people don't really want to bother with replacing the battery. And if this piece of legislation is successfully passed, I feel like this could be a huge win, in which we are able to, as consumers, now able to crack open our devices and probably within like 5 minutes able to switch out between a new battery. And this is going to be a huge win because the batteries are probably one of the only components on the iPhone that constantly need to be refreshed or constantly need to be changed. It's the only component in which that given enough time, the battery will eventually fail. Obviously, companies like Apple are going to do their best to try to push back on this legislation. It's not within their interest to try to make these iPhones or their devices more repairable. Even though this legislation won't really launch until probably like 2027 or late in our decade, this is going to put a major roadblock for Apple, in which they will need to completely overhaul or redesign their devices. Right now, Apple probably has a general good idea of what the device in 2027, 2028 is going to look like. Maybe like a rough sketch or something. But now, if this legislation is to become reality, Apple will now need to completely overhaul their design. And that's going to take a lot of money to sink into both development costs and research costs in trying to solve these issues. Apple is now tasked with the difficulty to try to make a device that is able to seal out some water, is able to solve the issue of securing the battery, but not with adhesive anymore. And they might need to figure out a way to try to fit this all in an iPhone. Maybe the iPhone is not as sleek as they initially thought anymore. So all of these are going to be different issues that Apple needs to overcome when it comes to redesigning a device. And for that reason, there's going to be so much cost when it comes to redesigning. That said, there's also going to be other financial aspects they need to think about when it comes to redesigning the battery. Right now, battery replacement is within Apple's best interest to keep it this way. Apple is able to make some money when it comes to replacing a battery. People will bring their devices to the Apple store, pay them around $100 to around $70 to get their battery replaced. And in the meantime, they're also bringing people to the Apple store too. While you're sitting there waiting for your iPhone to be fixed, you might be browsing the Apple store and looking at their devices. And every second that they're able to make an impression on you, it does eventually convert to sales. And in addition, by making these batteries really difficult to replace, a lot of people are going to be motivated to, when their battery does reach maybe around 70%, 80%, they're going to opt to upgrade their iPhone. If you're on the iPhone 12 right now and you see that the iPhone 15 is going to be released very soon, you might be incentivized to just say, what's the point of switching out the battery? I can just get a new iPhone. Even though your iPhone 12 is working perfectly fine, thought of, okay, I just need a new battery for my iPhone, you might be incentivized to just upgrade to the 15. With removable batteries, these are going to be factors of the past. Apple is not going to be able to bank on these objectives to try to generate some income. I really think that Apple is going to try to fight tooth and nail in order to try to get this legislation stopped. And it might involve something along the lines of trying to argue that their self-service program is already sufficient enough when it comes to in compliance with repair programs, in which Apple does provide guides and they do provide their own tools in which you can rent out and borrow from them, but they charge the parts like astronomically. We're talking like 4 to 6 times what a normal price would be for some of these parts. For a screen, the screen might cost like $300, but in reality it should only cost like around $50. But it is really apparent that you look at the prices of these components and they're just way too high in order to justify doing these repairs by yourself. So when it comes to navigating this situation, Apple really has 2 different options. they can either elect to release two different models of the iPhone. One for the European Union and then one for the rest of the world. The one that they release in Europe is going to be compliant with these regulations that has the removable battery. And then in the one with the rest of the world is they're going to keep on doing what they do currently. This would have a major implication in which they would kind of need to develop two different iPhones. Be it they have kind of done this in the past with the iPhone 14, where they made the iPhone 14 launch with eSIM in the US, and they made the iPhone 14 in the rest of the world launch with a physical SIM tray. And they could be doing something very, very similar. But the thing is that this is going to require a lot more work than just replacing a simple eSIM card reader, in which you gotta completely redesign the back. So I really don't see this being a very, very viable option. For that reason, I kind of see the second option coming into play, in which Apple is going to try their best to be in compliance with the regulation, but do the very, very bare minimum, in which they try to, make the battery still difficult, but maybe it still needs to be programmed. Maybe they'll provide batteries, but you gotta buy them from the Apple store, and then they'll charge maybe like $200 or like $100 in order to buy these batteries. And this is something that is very, very possible. In no world that I can picture, Apple is going to include like a screwdriver in the box and letting everyone just repair their devices freely. This is a company that's notorious ever since the first iPhone has been launched of making their devices hard to open up or hard to repair. And them including a screwdriver in the box is just wild to me. Personally, I'm really excited to see where this is headed. I'm someone that is really passionate when it comes to electronics repairs, and I really enjoy kind of refurbishing electronics, but being able to service your battery and replace the battery very, very easily is going to be just one major component that I just do not need to worry about anymore. So I see this as a really big win for like electronics repairs or third-party repairs. If I'm coming at this from a consumer standpoint, this is going to be really, really big. We might be coming into a world in which we're able to swap the battery so easily in that, let's say you're about to leave the house and your iPhone is at like 20%. Instead of like desperately trying to charge it in the wall and hoping it jumps up by 5 or 6% before you have to leave, you might be able to now open up the back of your iPhone, put in a new battery, and now it's at 100%. And this is a feature that a lot of consumers have enjoyed since the early 2000s, When we were a child, flip phones were pretty popular, and all of the flip phones had basically a removable battery. When the battery died, you could put in a new battery, or if you're on a long trip, you could have a big stash of batteries that you kept on plugging in. And this might be a reality for modern devices now with this legislation being passed. Obviously in the 2010s, companies decide to make the shift towards batteries not being replaceable in order to make their devices more sleek. If this legislation is successful, it could be forcing a really great change for us consumers. So overall, I'm really excited to see where this is headed, and if you guys have any opinions, I kind of want to hear them as well, so leave them down in the comments below. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful day, and I wish you guys luck with all your repairs.